Janet Harrison had seen a lot in her 23 years as an office secretary, but nothing like this. When the company announced that an alien ambassador would be visiting for a week, she had imagined a lot of things. Strange clothes, odd gestures, maybe some futuristic technology. She had not imagined a being so beautiful, so calm, and as she would soon discover, so biologically distracting. The alien arrived quietly one Monday morning. Zyra, as she introduced herself, floated into the office in a flowing robe that shimmered like liquid metal. Her skin was pale, with a soft, natural glow, and her movements were graceful, almost like she was dancing instead of walking. Humans in the room immediately turned to look, some with awe, some with disbelief. Even the CEO, a man who prided himself on being unshakable, raised his eyebrows and muttered, "Well, that's different." When the alien looked directly at her and smiled, a polite, serene smile, Janet felt her knees go weak. She had no idea that Zyra's species emitted subtle pheromones that could affect humans, especially those with a nervous disposition. The effect was not harmful, but it was noticeable, and Janet became its first unsuspecting victim. "Good morning," Zyra said in a soft, melodious voice. "I am pleased to meet all of you." "Janet, are you all right?" asked her coworker Michael, a tall man with a perpetual look of mild annoyance. I'm fine," she muttered, trying to steady her hands. She quickly picked up the papers she had dropped while backing away from Zyra, only to trip over a cable and send a stack of files tumbling to the floor. The sound of rustling papers echoed through the office. Zyra's calm gaze followed her, seemingly without judgment, yet Janet felt as though the alien could see straight into her soul. She had dealt with nervous clients, irate vendors, and even a malfunctioning office robot that had sprayed toner all over the hallway, but nothing had ever made her feel this, flustered. The day continued with Zyra observing the office operations. She asked questions with curiosity, tilted her head slightly as she listened, and occasionally reached out to touch a holographic display, seemingly fascinated by how humans use technology. Every time she did, Janet's heart raced anew. She spilled coffee not once, but twice, dropped a pen, and almost mistyped a meeting agenda into complete gibberish. By lunchtime, the office was buzzing with speculation. "What is it about her?" whispered Michael to a colleague. "She's beautiful, yes, but there's something strange. Every time she walks past someone, they act like they're in a cartoon." The alien lifted a small device to her lips, pressing a button that caused tiny holographic images of floating symbols to appear in the air. Janet blinked. How could anyone remain calm around someone like that? It wasn't just Janet. Others were experiencing minor effects as well. A man in accounting, usually calm and precise, was now scratching his head uncontrollably. Another employee, who had a reputation for sharp wit, had started laughing for no reason. The office manager, Mrs. Perkins, tried to keep everything professional, but even she admitted later that she had felt bizarrely lightheaded while assisting Zyra with scheduling. Janet decided she needed a plan. She couldn't spend the week acting like a complete fool, but what could she do? She thought of every possible solution, breathed deeply, count to 10, pin a paperclip to her shirt, hum a tune in her head. Nothing worked. Zyra's mere presence was enough to throw her into a frenzy. When Janet returned to her desk, she noticed that Zyra had paused in front of a digital calendar. The alien's fingers moved over the screen delicately, swiping and tapping, adjusting schedules with elegance. Janet tried to focus on organizing a pile of reports, but the strange feeling in her chest made her knock over a cup of pens. They clattered across the floor like tiny metallic raindrops. "Don't worry," Zyra said, looking at the mess. "Accidents happen." She had expected irritation or judgment, but Zyra's calmness only made her more flustered. She dropped to the floor to pick up the pens and muttered a garbled, "I'm sorry," which sounded more like "I'm sorry" in the chaos of her panic. By mid-afternoon, the office had become a mix of awe and laughter. Employees whispered about the alien's effect on humans, and Janet became an unintended source of amusement. Michael had taken to following her around, offering sarcastic advice like, "Maybe you need earmuffs or a lead apron." She moved gracefully from one task to another, occasionally pausing to ask a question in her soft, musical voice. Her curiosity about human work life was sincere, and she didn't notice the havoc she was causing. The end of the day brought a small relief. Most employees had learned to keep a safe distance, avoiding direct proximity to Zyra whenever possible. Janet had barricaded herself behind her desk, trying to catch her breath and regain composure. She glanced at the clock, 5:03 p.m. She had survived the first day. Barely. Before leaving, Janet decided she needed a plan for tomorrow. She pulled out a notebook and wrote. A pheromone shield? What was she thinking? Still, she had to try something. As she left the office, Janet noticed Zyra standing by the entrance, observing the human city beyond the windows. The alien's serene expression and calm demeanor were both inspiring and terrifying. Janet felt a pang of admiration. Despite the chaos she caused, Zyra seemed utterly confident, utterly at peace, and somehow entirely human in her curiosity. Janet knew she was in for a long week. She could only hope she would survive the next day without embarrassing herself completely. But as she walked home, she realized something else. Even though she felt helpless around Zyra, there was a strange excitement in the challenge. Humans had faced impossible situations before: space travel, alien contact, even corporate budget meetings that felt like wars, and they always found a way. Tomorrow, she decided she would fight back. Not with anger, not with avoidance, but with creativity. Humans were resourceful, inventive, and sometimes a little ridiculous, and Janet had all three qualities in abundance. Zyra might be beautiful, elegant, and biologically overwhelming, but Janet had one thing the alien did not: pure human determination. She smiled to herself, thinking of what she could try. Perhaps a funny hat, or maybe a pair of sunglasses indoors. The thought of using humor to fight pheromones made her chuckle, and for the first time that day, she felt in control. Little did Janet know, her hilarious attempts at countering Zyra's subtle powers would soon become legendary throughout the office, and she would discover that humans, with their quirks, mistakes, and resilience, were more than capable of handling even the most beautiful alien in the universe. The next morning, Janet arrived at the office determined. She had spent the night thinking of ways to resist Zyra's subtle but overwhelming effect. Her first idea was simple: avoidance. If she could stay as far away from the alien as possible, maybe she could keep her composure. That plan failed almost immediately. As Janet walked through the entrance, she collided with the office receptionist carrying a stack of files. She barely caught herself before falling and looked up to see Zyra standing in the lobby, her serene smile still perfectly in place. Janet's knees went weak again. "Good morning, Janet," Zyra said softly. The sound of her voice made Janet's heart race in a way that no caffeine ever could. "Gee, good morning," Janet stammered, backing away. She tried to make herself small, like a mouse trying to hide from a cat. Unfortunately, the office lobby was full of coworkers, and all eyes turned to watch the spectacle. "Is she okay?" whispered Michael from across the room. He leaned on the water cooler, trying to hide his smirk. "She looks like she just saw a ghost, or a very attractive ghost." Determined to regain control, Janet had brought a small assortment of items she hoped might help. Sunglasses, a stress ball, a notebook with motivational quotes, and a small handheld fan she planned to wave subtly to disperse whatever it was that Zyra emitted. It was a ridiculous plan, but Janet had never claimed to be normal. She stuffed the items into her bag and settled at her desk, keeping her eyes firmly on her keyboard. It didn't work. Zyra moved gracefully through the office, stopping to observe the digital schedules on the holographic screen. Every time she came near, Janet felt her heart skip a beat. Her fingers fumbled on the keyboard, and she nearly sent an email to the wrong client again. She caught herself just in time, but not before her hand knocked over a coffee cup. Dark brown liquid spread across the papers she had spent the morning organizing. "Oh no," Janet whispered, frantically grabbing napkins. She could hear the stifled chuckles of her coworkers. Michael gave her a thumbs up, and she glared at him, but he only winked and turned away. Zyra, calm as ever, tilted her head and studied Janet with curiosity. "Are you unwell?" she asked politely. Janet froze. How could she explain that it wasn't sickness, but a combination of pheromones, nervousness, and sheer human inadequacy? She opened her mouth, closed it, and then muttered something that came out as I'm fine." Zyra had a way of appearing exactly where Janet least wanted her to. As the morning progressed, Janet realized that she needed a new strategy: distraction. If she could keep her mind busy with something else, maybe she could resist the alien's subtle influence. She began organizing files at an incredible speed, shuffling papers, typing furiously, and muttering reminders to herself. She even tried singing quietly under her breath, a little tune she had learned in school. None of it worked. Every time Zyra moved within sight, Janet's focus crumbled, and she became a walking disaster. The first incident of the day came during a meeting with the CEO. Zyra had been invited to observe, and Janet had been responsible for preparing the notes. She handed the CEO the wrong folder, which contained doodles of cats she had drawn during lunch the day before. The CEO looked down, raising an eyebrow. Janet, why are there so many drawings of cats? Zyra, standing silently nearby, observed with a serene smile that somehow made Janet feel even more flustered. By mid-morning, Janet had decided that if she could not avoid Zyra or distract herself, she would have to fight back. She opened her notebook and began jotting down a series of ideas, some practical, some utterly ridiculous. Wear a ridiculous hat, cowboy, fedora, or top hat. Carry a small fan, check, already in bag. Cover herself in perfume to mask something. Create a small, portable, pheromone-neutralizing device. The last idea made her pause. It sounded insane, but Janet had a knack for inventing things on a shoestring budget. She decided to give it a try. She raided the supply closet and found small fans, a few air fresheners, and a roll of aluminum foil. In her mind, she was creating a pheromone shield. "What is that?" he asked. "It's a defense mechanism," Janet whispered, "against aliens." The fans whirred, the air fresheners sprayed, and a tiny holographic display blinked on. She felt confident that she had finally gained control. She was wrong. Zyra tilted her head in mild curiosity. "What is that you are wearing?" Instead, the contraption started spinning rapidly, sending air freshener in every direction. Papers flew, coffee cups tipped over, and holographic projections flickered wildly. The office erupted into chaos. Michael doubled over with laughter. "I knew it," he gasped. "You've officially lost it." Zyra remained calm, studying the scene as though it were a fascinating experiment in human behavior. Other coworkers slipped and stumbled around the room, trying to avoid the flying papers and the mist of scented air. By the time the office manager arrived, the room looked like a hurricane had passed through. Janet's hat fan device had gone flying, knocking over a tray of sandwiches. She stood frozen, face red, as the office erupted in laughter and mild chaos. Zyra stepped forward calmly. "Is this a normal human reaction to stress?" she asked. Janet opened her mouth, then closed it. How could she explain that it wasn't just stress but the subtle effect of alien pheromones? She gave a sheepish nod. Zyra tilted her head, considering this. "Fascinating," she said softly. "You humans are creative." She began making funny faces whenever Zyra walked past, attempting to distract herself by exaggerating her own absurdity. The tactic had mixed results. Her coworkers laughed, Zyra tilted her head in curious amusement, and Janet still felt flustered but slightly more in control. Throughout the afternoon, the office began to adapt. Employees discovered that keeping a sense of humor helped counter the strange effects. Some even joined in, making silly jokes or exaggerating their own reactions. Zyra, for her part, observed everything with calm fascination, occasionally smiling but never disrupting the workflow. By the end of the day, Janet was exhausted but triumphant. She had survived another round of alien-induced chaos without major embarrassment. She had learned that gadgets alone were not enough. Creativity, humor, and resilience were her true weapons. As she packed up to leave, Michael approached, still grinning. "You know, you might actually be enjoying this," he teased. Janet shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Maybe. But I'm not going down without a fight tomorrow." Zyra was beautiful and otherworldly, yes, but Janet had something just as powerful: determination, creativity, and a sense of humor. And tomorrow, she decided, she would turn that into her ultimate weapon. Janet arrived at the office on Wednesday morning determined to take the fight against Zyra's subtle influence to the next level. Yesterday had been a mess, but she had learned one thing: gadgets alone could not protect her from the aliens' pheromones. She needed a more clever human solution. She had brainstormed ideas all night and felt ready to implement them. Her first plan was simple but daring: disguise. If she could appear completely unnoticeable, maybe Zyra would pass by without affecting her. Janet rummaged through her wardrobe at home before leaving, selecting the most boring, drab outfit she could find: a gray sweater, dull navy slacks, and her least interesting shoes. She even tied her hair in a tight bun and avoided wearing any makeup. Her goal was clear: be invisible. Unfortunately, humans and aliens did not always perceive invisible in the same way. When Janet entered the office, she felt confident. Her coworkers barely glanced at her, but Zyra, as usual, floated through the entrance like a beam of light. Her eyes swept the room, settling on Janet instantly. Janet froze. Apparently, she was highly noticeable in her attempt to be invisible. "Good morning, Janet," Zyra said. The soft, melodic voice made Janet's chest tighten. She gulped and tried to respond, but all that came out was a squeaky, "Gee, good morning." She pulled out a small notebook and wrote down ideas, including funny faces, silly gestures, and exaggerated typing errors that would appear intentional. Her first test came quickly. Zyra glided past her desk, looking at some files on a nearby table. Janet immediately made a ridiculous face, eyes wide, tongue slightly sticking out, pretending to be intensely focused on a document. Her coworkers erupted into laughter. Michael doubled over, clutching his stomach. Even the usually stoic office manager snorted. Zyra, however, did not flinch. She simply tilted her head and studied Janet as though she were observing a rare species of human behavior. Janet realized that humor alone would not protect her. She needed more creativity. By mid-morning, she had assembled a small toolkit of office supplies: rubber bands, paper clips, sticky notes, a small fan, and a stapler. She called it her Human Ingenuity Defense Kit. Her plan was to use it to subtly disrupt the pheromone effect, distract Zyra, and regain control of her own reactions. The first test of the toolkit came when Zyra approached the coffee machine. Janet discreetly set up a small fan aimed at the area, hoping to blow away the invisible pheromones. She also taped a few sticky notes around the fan, just in case. She pressed the button, and the fan whirred to life. Immediately, papers flew off desks, coffee cups wobbled dangerously, and a few stray pens went spinning across the floor. Janet ducked behind her desk as her coworkers laughed and dodged the flying office supplies. Michael, of course, took the opportunity to snap a picture of Janet mid-chaos. Zyra stood calmly, watching the scene unfold with what Janet could only describe as mild fascination. "You humans are remarkable," she said softly, almost like a compliment. Janet peeked out from behind her desk. Remarkable. She felt more like a disaster, but the thought gave her courage. If humans could solve problems this way, with humor, ingenuity, and persistence, she could survive Zyra's presence after all. The next experiment involved more daring tactics. Janet decided to mix subtle humor with clever engineering. She rigged a small contraption at her desk, a paperclip balanced on a pen which, if tripped, would set off a tiny chain reaction of falling objects. The goal was not chaos, it was distraction. If Zyra saw a harmless, ridiculous event, maybe Janet could regain some control over her flustered responses. Her first opportunity came when Zyra moved to observe a holographic display of interstellar trade schedules. Janet carefully tripped the paperclip chain. Papers tumbled, sticky notes flew, and a rubber band snapped, pinging softly against the wall. Zyra's head tilted, and her serene expression remained unchanged. Janet felt her heart sink. Maybe humans were not as clever as she thought. But then something amazing happened. A coworker, inspired by Janet's antics, laughed and shouted, "Look out!" in mock alarm. Others joined in, creating a wave of playful chaos. Janet felt a small victory. Even if Zyra remained calm, the humans around her had begun to embrace creativity and humor as a way to cope. That was the real HFY moment. Humans, flawed and unpredictable, rising to the occasion. By lunch, Janet's confidence had grown. She had learned that her creative strategies, combined with humor, could not only help her survive but also boost office morale. She even considered submitting her Human Ingenuity Defense Kit as a serious proposal to the CEO, though she knew it would likely be rejected. Still, she smiled at the idea. Humans had survived far stranger challenges than an elegant alien ambassador. After lunch, Janet's boldest experiment began. She had decided to create what she called the full human shield, a combination of physical barriers, humor, and clever distractions. She positioned small fans around her desk, set up a few towers of stacked paper, and even rigged a small toy robot to roll around, occasionally bumping into her chair for comedic effect. When Zyra returned from observing the office kitchen, Janet activated the shield. Fans whirred, paper towers wobbled, and the tiny robot skittered across the floor. Her coworkers laughed, some cheering Janet on. Zyra's head tilted, and for a moment Janet feared she had made things worse. Then something incredible happened. Zyra reached out her hand and gently tapped one of the fans. It stopped immediately, the paper towers stabilized, and the robot froze. "You humans are inventive," she said softly, almost smiling. Janet felt a rush of pride. Even Zyra, calm and otherworldly, had recognized human creativity. It was a small victory, but a powerful one. Humans were messy, unpredictable, and sometimes chaotic, but that chaos came with intelligence, humor, and ingenuity. Janet realized that her attempts, ridiculous as they were, demonstrated exactly that. By late afternoon, the office had adapted to the ongoing chaos. Some coworkers wore sunglasses indoors to cope with Zyra's presence. Others made playful bets on who would be flustered next. Janet herself had grown more confident, relying less on gadgets and more on creativity, humor, and quick thinking. The day ended with a small celebration of survival. Janet, exhausted but triumphant, sat back at her desk as the office slowly emptied. She had faced Zyra, the most beautiful and calm alien she had ever seen, and had not only survived but adapted. She looked over at Zyra, who was quietly observing the city from the window. Janet realized something important. Humans might be unpredictable, clumsy, and chaotic, but they had a unique strength. They were resilient, inventive, and capable of finding humor and creativity even in the most challenging situations. And that was exactly the kind of strength Zyra seemed to respect. Janet smiled to herself. Tomorrow, she decided, she would push the boundaries even further. She would combine human creativity, humor, and persistence in new ways. And maybe, just maybe, she would finally learn how to navigate the beautiful alien's presence without completely falling apart. As she packed her things, Janet felt a quiet thrill. Humans had faced worse challenges than a very elegant, very calm alien ambassador. And with ingenuity, humor, and a little bit of chaos, they could rise to meet anything. Thursday morning arrived, and Janet felt a strange mix of dread and excitement. By now, she had survived 3 days of working alongside Zyra, the elegant, calm alien who caused inexplicable chaos just by existing. She had tried gadgets, hats, fans, paper towers, and even toy robots, and each attempt had been more ridiculous than the last. And yet, despite the chaos, she had begun to notice something surprising. She was learning to adapt. The morning started like every other. Janet entered the office, carrying her usual bag of supplies, her human ingenuity defense kit slightly lighter after yesterday's experiments. She spotted Zyra gliding gracefully through the lobby, observing the humans with serene curiosity. For the first time, Janet did not panic. She smiled and waved, and to her amazement, Zyra returned the gesture with a small, elegant nod. Janet felt a surge of confidence. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps she could survive Zyra's presence without turning into a comic disaster. Her coworkers, however, had other ideas. Michael immediately appeared at her side, grinning. "Ready for another day of chaos?" he teased. Janet rolled her eyes but allowed herself a small chuckle. "I think I'm ready for a smarter day of chaos," she said. The first test came almost immediately. Zyra floated toward the main conference table, where the office had set up a display of interstellar trade schedules. Janet decided to combine humor with subtle ingenuity. She had arranged a few small paper fans around the area, not to repel the alien's effect, but as part of a mini obstacle course to keep her mind busy. She moved quickly, pretending to adjust the fans and straighten holographic projections while keeping one eye on Zyra. This time, something unexpected happened. Zyra reached out and gently touched one of the fans, stopping its motion instantly. "Your humans are clever," she said softly, observing Janet with a faint smile. Janet froze. Clever. The word sent a thrill through her. For the first time, she felt as though her efforts were actually noticed. She straightened her back and focused on her tasks with renewed determination. By mid-morning, Janet realized that direct confrontation was no longer necessary. She could survive Zyra's presence by embracing her creativity and humor, and by interacting with her in small, subtle ways. She began talking to Zyra occasionally, explaining office procedures, joking about minor mishaps, and even offering explanations for her previous chaotic antics. Zyra listened with polite fascination, asking questions about human work life, about schedules, and even about why people laughed at seemingly minor events. Janet realized something remarkable. Zyra was learning about humans as much as Janet was learning about the alien. There was a mutual curiosity that made each interaction less intimidating and more collaborative. The breakthrough came during a routine meeting. The CEO, who had grown accustomed to Zyra's calm presence and Janet's unpredictable reactions, was presenting a report on interstellar trade negotiations. Janet, standing beside the holographic display to assist, accidentally knocked a stack of papers onto the floor. In previous days, this would have caused a minor panic or an elaborate chain reaction of chaos. Today, Janet laughed. Zyra's head tilted slightly and her calm expression softened. "Your humans are resilient," she said. Janet smiled. "We try," she replied. Instead of embarrassment, Janet felt a sense of pride. She had learned to embrace her mistakes, to turn them into opportunities for humor, and to engage creatively with Zyra instead of hiding. The alien's subtle effect no longer had to control her. She could navigate it with intelligence, humor, and adaptability. By lunch, Janet had developed a new strategy: collaboration. Instead of trying to resist Zyra alone, she decided to work with her. If Zyra was curious about human behavior, why not channel that curiosity into productive, funny, and harmless activities? She approached Zyra during the lunch break, carrying a tray with her sandwich and a small notebook filled with humorous observations about office life. "Zyra," Janet began cautiously, "would you like to see some human inventions?" "I am curious," she replied. Janet opened the notebook and began showing Zyra doodles, mini inventions, and harmless office experiments she had created to cope with the previous chaos. Zyra examined each page carefully, nodding and asking questions. Janet explained her thought process, the failed attempts, and the small successes. Zyra seemed genuinely fascinated. "Your humans are adaptable. You create solutions even in challenging circumstances," she said. Janet felt a thrill. Finally, her efforts were recognized, not just by her coworkers, who had long learned to enjoy the chaos, but by the alien herself. This was a human victory in its purest form: ingenuity, resilience, and humor acknowledged by an entirely different species. The afternoon brought a series of collaborative experiments. Janet and Zyra set up small, harmless office tests, balancing paper towers, organizing files in unusual ways, and even creating a small obstacle course for a toy robot. Each activity was designed to explore human creativity, problem-solving, and humor. Janet found herself laughing freely, no longer flustered by Zyra's presence. Her coworkers, seeing the two of them working together, joined in enthusiastically. Michael set up a makeshift scoreboard for the toy robot challenges, while other employees designed new obstacle courses for office objects. The office became a place of shared laughter, creativity, and experimentation. Zyra observed, asked questions, and occasionally offered suggestions, her serene demeanor adding a calm balance to the chaos. Janet realized something profound. Humans, with their flaws, mistakes, and unpredictable behavior, had a unique strength. They could adapt, innovate, and find joy even in difficult or unusual circumstances. This was exactly what Zyra had been witnessing: the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit. By late afternoon, Janet's confidence had grown immensely. She no longer relied on gadgets or elaborate contraptions. Instead, she used humor, creativity, and her understanding of Zyra's curiosity to navigate the alien's presence. She could make mistakes without embarrassment, laugh at herself, and even guide Zyra in exploring human office culture. The CEO, observing from a distance, shook his head with amusement. He had seen employees struggle, stumble, and panic over Zyra's presence, but now he watched Janet and Zyra collaborating with ease. It was a testament to human adaptability and resilience. As the workday ended, Janet packed her things with a sense of quiet pride. She had faced the alien ambassador, survived the chaotic influence of her presence, and even turned the experience into an opportunity for creativity, humor, and teamwork. Humans had been tested, and they had risen to the occasion, not through brute force or intimidation, but through intelligence, adaptability, and collaboration. Zyra, standing near the window, glanced at Janet with what seemed like genuine admiration. "Your humans are remarkable," she said softly. Janet smiled. "And your aliens are very patient," she replied with a small laugh. The two of them shared a quiet moment, a mutual recognition of curiosity, intelligence, and creativity. Janet realized that the week had taught her something profound. Humans were not just capable of surviving unusual circumstances. They could thrive in them, using humor, ingenuity, and cooperation to turn challenges into opportunities. As Janet left the office that evening, she felt a sense of accomplishment. Tomorrow would be the final day of Zyra's visit, and she was determined to make it memorable, not chaotic, but a celebration of human resilience and creativity. She imagined small experiments, clever pranks, and playful challenges that would demonstrate once again that humans, with their flaws and quirks, were truly capable of amazing things. Zyra had come to Earth as an observer, but Janet realized that humans had also observed and adapted to her, learning not only to survive, but to turn the experience into a showcase of ingenuity, humor, and collaboration. The week had begun with chaos, fear, and uncertainty, but it was ending with laughter, learning, and mutual respect. Janet felt a quiet thrill of pride. Humans had faced impossible situations before: alien contact, unpredictable technology, even corporate crises, and they had risen every time. This week was no different. And as she walked home under the evening sky, Janet knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, the humans of her office would show Zyra the very best of their creativity, resilience, and humor. They would prove that even in the presence of something utterly foreign and beautiful, humans could thrive, adapt, and shine. The final day promised to be a culmination of laughter, cleverness, and collaboration, a celebration of the human spirit in all its messy, brilliant glory. Janet grinned to herself. Humans were extraordinary, and this week had only proven it further. Friday morning arrived, and Janet could feel the excitement buzzing through the office. Today was the last day of Zyra's visit, and she was determined to make it memorable for humans and aliens alike. The week had been chaotic, hilarious, and full of lessons about resilience, creativity, and humor. Today, Janet wanted to show Zyra the very best of human ingenuity. Janet arrived early, carrying a large tote bag filled with office supplies, toys, and a few snacks she had creatively repurposed for experiments. She had a plan, a series of harmless challenges and demonstrations that would combine humor, creativity, and teamwork. It was ambitious, but Janet had learned this week that humans thrived when they embraced their quirks. Her coworkers had caught on immediately. Michael, grinning like a child before a prank, whispered to her, "What are you planning now? Are we going to break the office or impress Zyra?" Janet had set up small obstacle courses using paper towers, rolling toy robots, and stacks of folders. She had prepared a creativity wall where employees could pin doodles, funny notes, or clever inventions they had made over the week. Even the CEO, who usually preferred a calm, orderly office, had allowed the experiments. He had learned that sometimes chaos could reveal the best of human ingenuity. Zyra arrived shortly after, gliding in with her usual calm elegance. She observed the transformed office with a serene smile, her eyes moving from obstacle course to creativity wall. Janet waved her over. "Good morning, Zyra," Janet said cheerfully. "Welcome to the grand finale of human creativity." Employees took turns guiding a toy robot through a maze of paper towers, balancing pencils and carefully stacked folders. Laughter filled the office as robots toppled towers, pencils rolled away, and coworkers exaggerated their reactions for comedic effect. Zyra observed quietly at first, then leaned forward slightly. "Your humans are very inventive," she said. "Even in small games, you create complex solutions." She reached out to touch a small stack of folded paper airplanes. "You humans express ideas in many ways," she said softly. "Your methods are diverse and imaginative." "But they work." Employees laughed, helped each other, and learned new ways to collaborate. Zyra, calm and elegant, participated subtly, offering suggestions and occasionally nodding with approval. The pinnacle of the day came when Janet unveiled her final experiment, a human-alien collaboration challenge. She had divided the office into small teams, each responsible for creating a mini invention or display that represented human ingenuity. Zyra observed silently, then chose to join one team, working alongside Janet and a few coworkers. The challenge was simple: create a structure or device using only office supplies that could perform a small, harmless function, like holding a cup, launching a paper plane, or balancing a small object. Janet's team immediately got to work, using pencils, paper, sticky notes, and rubber bands. Zyra watched carefully, asking questions and offering subtle guidance. As they worked, Janet realized something remarkable. Zyra was not just observing, she was learning, adapting, and collaborating. Humans had shown resilience, humor, and creativity throughout the week, and now the alien was responding in kind. It was a true partnership, built on curiosity, intelligence, and mutual respect. By mid-afternoon, the challenge was complete. Each team presented their invention, demonstrating creativity, teamwork, and humor. Janet's team had built a small catapult that could launch a folded paper plane into a cup. The crowd cheered as it succeeded on the first try, and even Zyra's calm eyes seemed to sparkle with approval. "Your humans are innovative," Zyra said softly. "Even in playful exercises, you demonstrate intelligence and adaptability." Humans had faced an alien presence, adapted to it, and turned the experience into something extraordinary. As the day wound down, Janet gathered her coworkers for a small reflection. They talked about what they had learned: patience, collaboration, the value of humor, and the power of creativity. Zyra, standing beside them, nodded occasionally, offering quiet observations about human behavior. Finally, it was time for farewells. Zyra approached Janet, her serene expression softening into something akin to a smile. "Janet Harrison," she said, "your humans are remarkable. You have shown creativity, resilience, humor, and intelligence. You have adapted in ways I did not expect. You've taught us patience, calmness, and how to keep our cool under pressure." She had survived the week, transformed chaos into creativity, and demonstrated the very best of human ingenuity. As Zyra glided out of the office for the final time, Janet looked around at her coworkers, smiling and laughing. They had faced an extraordinary challenge and had come together as a team, embracing humor, creativity, and resilience. Michael nudged her playfully. "So, what's next? Another alien visit, or maybe a robot invasion?" As she packed her bag and left the office, Janet felt a quiet pride. This week had been more than just surviving an alien presence. It had been a celebration of the human spirit. Humans had proven that they could rise to any challenge, turn mistakes into opportunities, and find joy and creativity even in the most unexpected situations. And somewhere in the stars, Zyra would remember it too. The humans of this office, messy, clever, unpredictable, and brilliant, had left an impression that no alien could forget. Janet stepped out into the evening air, feeling the glow of success and the warmth of human accomplishment. She had faced the most unusual challenge of her career and emerged stronger, smarter, and more confident. And she knew deep down that humans would continue to thrive, no matter what extraordinary encounters awaited them in the future. She laughed softly to herself. Humans might be messy, chaotic, and sometimes ridiculous, but they were brilliant. And that brilliance, Janet knew, would carry them through anything, even the most elegant, serene, and beautiful alien ambassadors. The week had begun with nervousness, chaos, and fear. It ended with laughter, creativity, and respect, a perfect showcase of what humans could do when they faced the unknown. Janet looked up at the sky, imagining Zyra leaving Earth, and felt proud. Humans had risen to the challenge, and in doing so, they had proven that their ingenuity, humor, and resilience were their greatest strengths. The adventure had been chaotic, hilarious, and unexpected. But most importantly, it had been a celebration of humanity. And Janet knew that humans would always find a way to shine, no matter how extraordinary the circumstances. She walked home with a spring in her step, smiling at the thought that humans, clever and inventive as ever, had truly left their mark on an alien, on their office, and on themselves.